Last chapter is a short chapter, but it's quite an important chapter. It's all about scheduling and just a scheduling introduction that we've got. So that's chapter 10 that we're going to look at. Um, just paging through it as we go through now. And I've only included one very simple example. There's some couple of other examples here as well that you should please go through. So please just do not only learn the example that we're going to look at. So I've tried to summarize the lecture because I've seen much of the recordings are quite long, and it's actually quite large files that's uploaded onto YouTube. So I want to try and limit it as much as possible. So if you look at your construction sequence, there is a certain thought process that you go through. So many of you that are in the industry already might have learned a process already that you go through. Some people do it differently than others. Some work according to the BOQ items in the trades, other works from another template that you've worked with before, and you do your sequencing usually. But I think in short what we're going to explain here is very similar to is basically the process that everyone uses or follows. So then you have your program considerations. That's what I just talked about. So it will depend on your specific project. If you're looking at a road construction project, it will be different than your typical building project because you will have certain sections of the program that will repeat itself depending on the amount of cut and fill that you have to have on your roads. And then you have your resource considerations. How much resources do you have available to actually do the work? And you always try and get some continuity within your work. So you've got your the example that I always use is a bricklayer. For instance, if you sequence your work, you want to try and keep the same face bricklayer on a certain section, and you want to try and finish a section within a day. To keep the signature more or less the same, so that you don't have a line of where the bricklayer started and stopped on the one day, or where a new bricklayer had to come in and finish a job. You will always see that line whenever you look at the facade of the building. So those are the things that you need to look at. Okay, and then figure 10.11, a very important slide for me, is whenever you do your sequencing, you have your sequence of operations and then your construction methods and choice of plant. So, and then you have your program direct durations and your program put out on a bar chart. So this is more or less the process that you do your scheduling. If you use programs like CCS or Microsoft projects or so, these items can take place fairly simultaneously. You do not have to do this first three items in preparation of developing your bar chart. You can actually sequence your items on your program. You can look at the methods that you're going to use. You can put in the durations, and you can link your items to produce your bar chart. So the program just allows you to do some of the operations simultaneously. Okay, so whenever you look at your sequencing of programs, you always consider your drawings, identify the main activities to think about, prepare the phasing diagram for appropriate to help you in getting the right sequence in place, and to get your thought process in that sense. It's always if you approach it very practically, it's a very nice thing, scheduling, because you're building the building basically in your mind as you go along. If you have a model to work from, it just makes life much easier. And then you look at the significant elements or stages of the project. So you divide your project into different stages or sections. Do not have too many activities, so please do not overburden yourself, especially at the beginning of a project, because you will it just becomes too much information. Break it down into easily understandable chunks that you can use. Do not worry about the minor detail at this stage. Okay, then you look at your method statements. Where are your cranes going to be? Material, hoarding, hoisting, access, equipment, scaffolding that you need to acquire. Temporary works. Will you have to build a temporary shelter maybe for a certain section that you have to have precision painting put on, for instance? Do you have to construct a large or your formwork that you have to construct for temporary for a short while you pour your concrete, that type of thing? Creating working space around your structure, that type of things. Then you have your program durations. Then you put in your subcontractors, how long it will take for each item, the plant, the labor, supervision. You take that into consideration, and then you list your activities. You use your summary activities in the program. You enter your duration, and you link your activities. So with the programs that you've got available, you can do this simultaneously, and you can move your items up and down to suit your requirements. So it makes life a bit much easier to do it on like in a bit more organic way than going through it in a systematic way. So the programs allow you to think a little bit more freely about your sequencing and programming. Okay, so the example that we're going to look at is a very simple example of just applying that. Just make sure that you go through the rest of the examples as we go through. They add a couple of details, like for instance in figure 10.4, you will see that they've added reinforcing, and it's a different way of construction. So now you've got brickwork instead of concrete, so you've got 9 items that you schedule instead of the normal 7. So just make sure that you go through that as well. So they've got a number of examples that you can go through within the chapter. Some of the sequencing items that we're going to do, we will deal with a little bit later on in Unit 5, but make sure that you start reading through Chapter 10 already. Okay, so we've got a very simple example of a basement that needs to be constructed. So you've got your excavating and your support, your blinding slab, your floor construction, wall construction, and you've got your backfill and earth, your backfill that you've got here in this side. So you can see it's been drawn out, and this is the diagram that the previous figure spoke about. Diagram just makes it much easier, and this can also be utilized whenever you do a method statement as well. Okay, so what they've done is they've gone and sequenced the items. So here is the items, just the process that they've used. So you've got your diagram, so they've drawn it out. Key considerations, then you consider certain key considerations. So the sequence of the work requires consideration of the ground conditions, as this directly influences the earth support methods to be adopted on site. This might include the use of sheet piling or the battered excavations as illustrated in the diagram. And then you sequence your items as we've seen that they've sequenced it, and then you produce your linked bar chart from that. So first things first, you sequence and you list your items. Here you can see they've added some additional information. For instance, they've got the formwork first, and then placing of reinforcement, and then pouring of the concrete. And then you've got your concrete wall and your backfill. And once you've sequenced them, you can allocate time to that, and then you can see Okay, this is more or less how much time you need. You need about 19 days for it, and then you can make adjustments according to your available resources. So maybe looking at your formwork, placing of your formwork, you can maybe put a one team on the one wall and another team on the other wall to shorten this period. So here what they've done is they've started with the placing of the formwork as the one wall is completed, and then as the other walls are being completed, the rest of the reinforcement is placed. Then the concrete is poured. You can even bring this forward if you want to. As the one wall is complete, you can maybe pour that one wall if there's a construction joint that you might have to put in between the different sides of the walls. So very simple explanation of how the sequencing works. And that is more or less it for chapter 10. Just make sure that you go through the entire chapter and just read through it to get the insight. Why I didn't include all of the items from 10.3 of your book is because that relates to your actual construction sequencing. So this first section relates to up to page 204, basically relates to your sequencing methods that you would use whenever you do a tender. So that's why I included that. So just be mindful of that I've split chapter 10 into one section and another section as you get into construction. So just make sure that you do note that difference. Okay, thanks everyone. All of the best for you. Bye.